I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is our own Derek Peterson. Derek, you're doing the single worst thing that we as human beings do on a regular basis. That is move. Explain your move to the people so we can just get sympathy for basically everything you say from this point forward, because there is nothing like the experience of moving from home to home.
Well, my wife and I bought our first house. May 29th is when we closed. We're moving from an apartment on a third floor, 45 minutes away from the house, to the house. And we bought a house in the Illinois, like Chicago lands real estate market, which is just like tear inducing awful. Very, very bad. We actually, at one point through the process, we were just like hate scrolling Zillow in the Oklahoma City zip code. Like, oh my God, look at everything that we could buy for the price that we're paying here. We could get what amounts to a mansion in Oklahoma City. My mom actually texted me at one point. She's like, we could sell you our house and it would be 40 grand cheaper than what you're looking at there. I was like, don't tell me that, because my sanity is already hanging by a thread. Um, so please don't tell me that. Yeah. So we're moving. The official like move into the house is on Saturday. Um, so I've got all of my desk stuff. So basically, the most expensive things that I own are in a house that I'm not currently living in. So the last 2 nights since setting up my desk have been very stressful. I've got like 3 cameras in this room right now just to like keep an eye on everything to make sure that nothing moves.
It's unbelievable, man. I like that process of hate scrolling too. Been there. Know exactly what that's like. I don't do it because I'm in the inverse situation as you, to where like in that area, because like you're living in the area that I grew up in, and I do like the opposite sometimes. Well, it'll make me feel better about looking at a specific area, or about like, oh, like, if we ever need to get a bigger house, like, what would we even be looking at? But yeah, the everybody talks about the fantasizing on Zillow. No. The hate scrolling. There's something to it, man.
Well, we wanted to stay in Arlington Heights. Arlington Heights is where our apartment is currently, and we really like we really like where we're at. Some of the food in like downtown Arlington Heights is
It's great.
phenomenal. And there was a Greek place that just opened down the street from our apartment complex that is perfect. And I'm very sad we have to leave it. But we wanted to stay, but like houses in the Arlington Heights area are like, the house that we bought currently, like this would cost 500,000 or more in Arlington Heights. It's insane. It's ridiculous. So
Yeah. Uh, trust me, I get it. My mom lived through that whole experience, and yeah, it's wild what you have to pay in that area. Okay, so you mentioned the hate scrolling in Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma area.
hmm
You're an Oklahoma grad, so let's
hmm
start with your alma mater here. I was talking to Chris Plank about this yesterday, and the question that's really been asked for the last 3 years is now more relevant than ever. Of is Oklahoma SEC ready? I still think it's a fair question to ask, because the strengths of this team, it's the offensive skill players, it's having a couple of those studs on defense. We look at the perceived weaknesses of this Oklahoma team, or at least what we think are the question marks, and it's the line of scrimmage. And it's
hmm
really similar to the way that we talked about the Lincoln Riley version of Oklahoma, albeit with Brent Venables. Where do you stand on the whole SEC ready question for Oklahoma?
I think it's a two-part question. So we were actually back home one Saturday ago for my father-in-law. He was getting remarried, um, and they had their party in Norman. And for me, it was my first time going back to Norman since I graduated in 2017. My first time since maybe like pre-pandemic. It's been a long time since I've been back to Norman. And so my wife and I were just kind of driving around campus, looking around, like seeing all the new stuff, seeing how much Lindsay has changed. Um, the interstate isn't a mess anymore, which was great. And we were just kind of driving through the neighborhoods, like right off campus, looking at, old houses that we or family members stayed in. And we drove past, this is a house. We're not anywhere near like Fraternity Row or anything like that, just a house. and there was a giant just SEC flag hanging off the balcony. And then we kept driving, and we turned the corner, and then I saw another one. An SEC flag, like not an OU flag, like not anything, just like blue with the SEC logo on it. And I was like, we're here. We made it. It feels like forever ago that story dropped that OU and Texas were joining the conference, and now we finally made it. And I think from an operational standpoint, from like an excitement standpoint, from everybody outside of the football program, like Brent Venable's circle, they are so ready for this. They've been doing some operational things to get their game day ready for what amounts to the Premier League in college football. Trying to get tailgating in a place on Lindsay where they're not going to be drowning. Just there is a feeling of excitement in and around Norman about this move, and it's finally here. The football team, just to be frank, I think this is going to be a transitional year. You look at the two schools that are entering the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma. Texas is much more ready. And I think anybody that can look at Oklahoma objectively would say the same thing. Obviously, Texas went to the college football playoff last year. They look positioned to be one of the teams that challenges for a spot in the expanded playoff this year. You mentioned the line of scrimmage. I think Oklahoma still has some building to do under Brent Venables. And I don't think that's a result of anything that Brent has done poorly in his first 2 years. I think it's commentary on where the program was when he got it. There are a lot of people who believe that, and I think justifiably so, that Lincoln Riley still has questions as a program builder and a cultivator of depth within a program. There are a lot of Oklahoma fans and people around that program that thought, as the program shifted away from Bob Stoops to Lincoln Riley's program, the quality of the roster got worse, the depth got worse, the development of talent on the roster got worse. And to some extent, I think the results bear that out when you look at the back half of Riley's tenure at Oklahoma. When it was no longer Bob Stoops guys, there were some struggles. And you can even apply that to the quarterback position. I mean, Baker Mayfield was there when Lincoln got there. Kyler Murray was ready to roll. Jalen Hurts was Jalen Hurts when he arrived at Oklahoma. Spencer Rattler had to leave Oklahoma to re-find himself. And Caleb Williams was, he was the number one pick the second he stepped on campus. I mean, that's a really good talent. We're going to see, some stuff with Jackson Arnold. 3 turnovers in his first start. He's going to be, he's going to be a freshman, but he's not a freshman.
Yeah.
There wasn't much opportunity to play or see the field or get meaningful reps when Dylan Gabriel is there. Now, for them to move on from Dylan Gabriel and all that experience to Jackson Arnold at the same time they're entering the SEC, I think says a lot about their confidence level in Jackson Arnold. But I think the thing that, is going to be a really big storyline for OU moving through this upcoming season, and, Jackson is, this affects Jackson, is if you look at the mid-tier in the Big 12, talking about like Iowa State, Kansas State, Baylor some years, Texas Tech some years, that middle tier of the Big 12 does not hold a candle to the middle tier of the SEC. The teams that are going to be like mediocre SEC teams would beat mediocre Big 12 teams all the time. And I think Oklahoma is going to find itself in that mid-tier in this first year. And when you make that jump, you can't go on the road and turn the football over 3 times. If you go to Ames, Iowa, and you turn the football over 2 or 3 times, especially with the talent that OU has on defense, you're probably still in a position to win that football game. If you go to Auburn and you turn the ball over 3 times,
forget about it.
It's a much different ballgame. I remember 2 editors that I had in Nebraska during my time in Nebraska when Scott Frost was hired as the head coach in 2017, December of 2017, they went to the Peach Bowl for that UCF Auburn game. And now remember, we're covering Nebraska, so like we're covering Big Ten players. So we've seen Ohio State, we've seen Michigan, we've seen Wisconsin and Iowa. We've seen big bodies. And I remember the lasting impression from that Peach Bowl for my two editors, and Aaron still talks to me about this. They're on the field in pregame warmups, and they're just watching, what's unfolding in front of them, and then Auburn players walk by them, like from behind them over here. They walk ahead of them, and the reaction was, Jesus Christ, those guys are huge. Like, welcome to the SEC, OU. So you got to get bigger on the offensive line. You had to get bigger on the defensive line. You had to get bigger overall on the defense. I think they got bigger in the secondary. I think they got bigger and better on the defensive line. You got to replace 5 starters on the offensive line. You got a new offensive coordinator. You got a first-year starter at quarterback. Is Oklahoma ready for the SEC? I don't know. But given the context of where Oklahoma finds itself, I don't think that's necessarily the most appropriate question right now. They're going to learn this first year. They're going to learn where the deficiencies are, where they have to build this program. And I think, I think a guy like Brent Venables deserves, some trust that he's going to take the data points that he gathers from this upcoming season, and he's going to build a program that can fit into the SEC.
It's a really good answer, and there are a lot of layers to this to understand what Oklahoma's situation is, what the level of, I don't want to say panic is, because that's not the right word. You talk about it being a transition. It is a transition type year. At the same time, fair or not, if this still doesn't look like a Brent Venables Clemson defense at Oklahoma, which it has not so far, we talked about the personnel issues of trying to implement that. And when you go out and you spend on someone like Dominic Williams in the transfer portal, you're like, all right, this is kind of the vision, and you're trying to plug in immediate, ready to play guys. But if this still doesn't look like that, and if it's 7-5, and all of those things that we're talking about are still very evident, where, man, it's a team that's getting beat up, and their margin for error is just not great. And this team maybe in different years is 10-2 in the Big 12, but it's a 7-5 type season. I don't think it's that Brent Venables gets fired, but I do think that going into year 4, he's probably on every hot seat list in existence, even if Oklahoma fans are still kind of going to bat for him. Is that a fair take, that would be the outside perception of him heading into 2025 if this year played out like that?
I think it's fair to a degree. I mean, Oklahoma has set a ridiculously high standard for itself. This is what happens when you have the same AD and head coach for a better part of 2 decades. And that coach is a historic coach, and then he hands the reins to somebody that takes him to the college football playoff repeatedly. The standard is so high at Oklahoma. It's compete for national championships. That's the standard. It's not, let's win some conference titles and let's beat some ranked teams, and let's have some good home seasons. No, it's compete for national championships. And so, if you get into, if you're going into your 4th year and, you've got what the record was in year 1, and you've got, let's say, a 7-5 season like you outlined, sure, I think there are going to be some questions for Brent. I don't think we're there, because I also don't think the defense is going to be bad. I think this will look like a Clemson defense, like a Brent Venables defense.
Should.
Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, Danny Stutzman at linebacker, Billy Bowman at safety. You mentioned Dominic Williams, who they brought in from the transfer portal. I was listening to Eddie Radosevich at Sooner Scoop talk about this team in the middle of spring on Teddy Lehman and Gabe Eichert's podcast. And they were asking him how he felt about the defensive line. He's like, if we could just get one more interior guy in here, if we could just get a guy that they could lean on, one more, I feel pretty good about the position. And they get Dominic Williams from TCU. I think this defense, in terms of its ceiling, I think it could be one of the 3 or 4 best defenses in the SEC. When that's the case, you're going to have a relatively large margin for error with your offense. Now, in the Big 12, if you have an elite defense, you're going to be in every single game. it's really more of like a prerequisite to be competitive in the SEC to have a good defense. So like there's another difference right off the bat. But I think OU's defense is going to be good, potentially really good. It's and it has to, because it has to help out the offense. But I think if that occurs, if we get a defense like what we expect to see or what we think we might see, um, if it's a 7-5 season, I don't know that necessarily means bad things for Brent Venables. You just have to consider the context. OU is not in a place where they should be expecting to walk into the SEC and win 9 games. They're just not. I listened to a couple podcasts in the spring. They're like, can you get to 9 wins, 9-3, and be in the conversation for a college football playoff? I think so. I think that'd be great. I think that's too optimistic right now. I like an 8-4 season would be great for OU. There are going to be growing pains with Jackson Arnold. There are going to be growing pains with the offense. Now, it helps that they get 4 games at home. They don't have to leave Norman for a month to begin the season. But you gotta play at Auburn in your first road game. The back half of the schedule is really tough. 4 losses would be a success, I think. Let me reframe it. 8 wins in your first year in the SEC would be a success. If it's 7 wins, you go to a bowl game and you have a really, really good defense that keeps you in every game, and you have those 5 losses because you have to replace everything on your offense. Like I don't think that's an issue, and I don't think anybody would view Brent, if that is what unfolds. I don't think anybody would view Brent Venables' job as being in danger.
Yeah, you're right. Context is key, and with the schedule that's got 7 matchups against teams that won at least 9 games last year. I mean, it's an absolute gauntlet that Oklahoma has. Year 1 in the SEC, and it will be.
It's the SEC, man. You say that about everybody. It's going to be a fun year.
It is, and you know what? For those that can go into this with the right perspective on the Oklahoma side, it does have the ability to have a lot of those satisfying wins and those satisfying moments that will make us maybe think, hey, Oklahoma is ready to go. And maybe if they're competitive in those games that we think are just, they have no chance whatsoever, that changes the entire conversation surrounding Brent Venables and what he's building. It is interesting, though, that Oklahoma and Texas leave the Big 12, and it's this new era of the conference that feels fun. And I'm not the first to come up with this concept. We were talking off air. We're like, do we know who the first to say this was? But I think there's a lot of truth in it. I am fully on board with the Big 12 as America's conference. I think that you kind of go through it and you realize it makes a lot of sense because you don't have the traditional powers anymore with Oklahoma and Texas gone. So it feels like the conference race has opened up a lot. You've got teams from Tempe to Orlando to West Virginia. You've got America's quarterback in Noah Fafita. You've got no lawsuit over conference, TV contracts and stuff like that, like the ACC has. You don't have this sense of elitism like what's there right now in the SEC and the Big Ten. You've got Colorado, but outside of Colorado, how many of those teams in the current version of the Big 12 are truly hated nationally? You can get into a West Virginia Pitt sort of thing, I guess, but still, it doesn't feel like a conference that has a lot of hate coming into it. And if you exclude UCF claiming a national title, a game that you're talking about, 2017, for beating Auburn, how many, you're talking about 1990 Colorado as the last national champ among those current Big 12 members. So nobody's going to claim you're a bandwagon member if you kind of jump onto one of those teams or something like that. What are your thoughts on the Big 12 as America's conference?
Kind of funny that OU leaves and then the Big 12 becomes almost like a land rush of sorts. The conference is, you mentioned hate. There is a lot of hate within the conference geared at one team in particular. If you listen to various Big 12 fan bases, just ask them about how they feel about Utah's fan base. Utah expects to just walk into the Big 12 and win the Big 12. And, I think there's some merit to that. When healthy, they won consecutive Pac-12 titles and, could have won a third last year if half their team wasn't on the injured reserve by the end of the season. I love the concept because there are some very, very fun teams in the Big 12 next season. there are some teams that are going to be super hard to watch, like Arizona State. Um, but there are some teams that are going to be just such a joy to watch. And there are some huge games early in the schedule too. I like what the Big 12 schedule makers did. We get Oklahoma State hosting Utah, and then a week later we get Utah hosting Arizona. Like that's your Big 12 title discussion right there. I think we'll see what happens with like Dave Aranda at Baylor. There could be some coaches fired midseason, but I think that there's also the potential for 5 or 6 teams to be entering into like mid-October, November, feeling like, all right, we got a shot at making it to the Big 12 title game. And there are a bunch of like storylines to get behind if you are somebody with like no skin in the game. So yeah, as America's conference, I could totally get behind it. It's not, like you said, the elitism of the SEC and the Big Ten. It's almost like, if you're wanting to get into European soccer or European football, and you're like, yeah, I just don't really want to, like, I don't want to back Manchester United. I don't want to back Real Madrid. Like, I want to find like a Crystal Palace or like somebody that's like, somebody that I can support, but people aren't going to call me like a front runner when I tell them that I'm supporting them. Big 12 is your league, man. It's your league.
I'm so on board with that. If you have a team that's just out of the 12-team playoff race mid-October or something like that, and I realize there's going to be a lot of people that feel like they're part of that conversation, but if you realize your team is truly out of it, it's a 3-3 start or something like that, go find yourself a Big 12 team. Find yourself a Big 12 team, somebody that's got a really good quarterback. There's so many good quarterbacks in the Big 12 this year, and it just feels like college football kind of in its purest form with the way that it plucked some of the fun parts of the Pac-12 and the fun parts of the American, and now it's like this conference that, in my opinion, like it can be what the Pac-12 after dark was in many ways, of like just pick a team, or if you're trying to salvage a day of bets or something like that, find a Big 12 team that's on at 10 at night or something like that. And I realize their kickoff times aren't that late, but still find one of those teams and get on board. Is there a
they're
team?
late. They're
It's
late.
like
They're going
who's
to be
the
late.
Okay, so wait, are we talking about like, because I haven't looked at like the full rundown for those specific games, but like they're not starting at like 9 or 10 o'clock, are they?
Well, I think you're going to get, some of those. I mean, it'll still be Pac-12 after dark. It'll just be called Big 12. Because the teams that are playing in those slots are going to be Arizona and Arizona State, and Utah and Colorado, because that's what they're used to. And you can get, this is the thing when you have a conference that stretches from Orlando and Morgantown, West Virginia, all the way over to like Utah and Provo. You got to get the guys on the East Coast earlier, and then you got the further West teams. Those are going to be later in the day. I think Arizona State is going to be playing a ton of 9:30 games because nobody wants to freaking watch that team. I like Kenny Dillingham. I like him. We'll see. I like him as a coordinator. I think the jury's still out but also, like Utah, they were just absolutely murdered by injuries last year. But yeah, I think some of those teams are going to be playing in the super late slot. But certainly not Colorado.
No.
Certainly Colorado is going to be shoved down our throat. Which
ad nauseum.
I kind of go back and forth. I think they're a little annoying, but I think they're a good kind of annoying, because like this is like what college football is supposed to be, like a little chaotic. And you could apply that to the Big 12 as a whole. One of these teams is getting into the college football playoff, guaranteed. The winner of this league goes to the college football playoff. Like Tetairoa McMillan and Noah Fafita against a unassuming Big Ten or SEC defense, like that could be some fun. This is going to be a league of chaos this upcoming season, and we'll see. It's going to be all day of Big 12 football because they gotta stretch out all the time slots.
Your pronunciation of Tetairoa was just impeccable. That was spot on, man. Unbelievable. I've been working on that one, and I've struggled with Tetairoa. I need to just give it my Tungavaloa, Uyunglele, Iamaleava type treatment and just say it 10 times every day, because if I'm this big of a Noah Fafita stand, I need to be able to say Tetairoa McMillan with my chest. I call him everybody calls him T-Mac.
T-Mac.
I gotta. I got to be a little bit more well versed on that. All right, let's get you out
It's
of here
just
with
about
some.
picking. It's just about picking your spots, man. If we're talking Tennessee football, I'm only going to call the quarterback by Nico. You just got to pick your spots. You got to know what you're good at.
Yeah, that's true. Yamalaya is fun. It's fun to say when you can get it right. When you have any sort of hiccup, you feel like an idiot with it coming. You're like, yeah, it just doesn't sound particularly good. All right, I want to get you out of here with some gambling thoughts. Let's start with the Big 12 winner, the team that will automatically have a spot in the college football playoff in this new expanded field. Utah is the favorite at plus 310. Kansas State is plus 350. Seen a lot of love for that. And then Kansas is plus 750. Do you like someone from that group, or would you be more tempted at someone with 10-1 odds like in Arizona or like a Texas Tech?
What did you say Utah was at?
Utah was at 310, plus 310.
And what is Oklahoma State at?
I think Oklahoma State's like plus 1,200, which was, I looked at that and I was like, wait a minute. A Mike Gundy coach team is 12-1 to win the conference in a world without Oklahoma and Texas. That would be intriguing too.
Yeah, so I did a piece 2 months ago on SDS going over this exact thing. Oklahoma State's win total was at 7.5.
Yeah.
I looked at over the last 3 years the teams that have outperformed their win expectations, their win totals set by Vegas in the preseason. Oklahoma State is one of the best performing teams against preseason expectations in all of the Power Five over the last 3 years. Oklahoma State returns a seventh-year senior quarterback. They return everybody on the offensive line. They return everybody at wide receiver. And they have the best running back in the country, who is a Heisman Trophy contender, and Ollie Gordon second. Oklahoma State gets Utah at home, which I think is significant. And that'll also be Utah's first Big 12 road game. Unless you are like a Bob Stoops coached Oklahoma team, Stillwater or Central Michigan, Stillwater is a very tough place to play. I think Oklahoma State is gonna go to the Big 12 championship game. I really like that team, and they were a classic Mike Gundy team last year, where he just got in his own way. The first 3 games of the season, first 3 or 4 games of the season, one of which was an inexplicable loss that they shouldn't have had. He just refused to give the football to Ollie Gordon. Over the last 8 games, they restructured what they did. They repivoted, and they said, we're just going to ride Ollie Gordon. And then they won. I've got it in front of me. They won 7 of 8 to reach the Big 12 title game. And Gordon was absolutely fantastic. When you have the type of returning production that they have, and they have playmakers at wide receiver, I think they have the pieces to make defenses pay for just keying on Ollie Gordon. And unless you are committing like 8-9 guys to the box to stop Ollie, you're not going to stop Ollie. I think they could legitimately be in the college football playoff conversation. Obviously, because if they're in the conversation to win the Big 12, they're going to be in that playoff conversation. But to me, the Big 12 race is a 3-team race at the top. The 3 teams that I would back would be Oklahoma State or Utah or Arizona. 2 of the newcomers in Oklahoma State. I think, Utah's got some stuff to replace. And as much as I like Cam Rising, we have to see what he looks like after an entire year away from football. And this was not, I don't know how well this was covered on a national stage, but his knee situation was not
all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not just an ACL. It was not just like a ligament. It was like he had a complete knee replacement. He shredded ligaments in his knee. He took a whole year off. And then we also have, Brant Keefe at tight end, who is he's not Brock Bowers, because nobody's Brock Bowers, but he's of that same ilk where you can move him around a formation and do a bunch of different things with him that you can't do with a traditional tight end. They had Dorian Singer in the transfer portal, which is huge because they haven't had like a straight baller at wide receiver in a very long time. I think Utah, if the guys are healthy, if they have just overall better injury luck than what they had last year, which I feel like it'd be hard to have worse luck than what they had last year. Utah's going to be in that conversation. And then obviously Arizona, the defense got better last year. They got to replace the coaching staff, but they've got Noah Fafita and they've got T-Mac. When you got those two guys, you're going to be in a lot of games. They can will you to wins and they can win you football games. But 1,200, like I'd be taking Oklahoma State. I think they're going to be good.
Is it interesting though that if you're putting a bet on one of these teams in the Big 12 race, do you double down then and say I mean obviously because the champion of the conference gets in the college football playoff, but are you like willing to kind of double down essentially and be like, all right, I'm going to put a bet on them to win the conference. I'm going to put a bet on them to make the playoff. Like those two things kind of go hand in hand because I don't know how much hedging there is with putting a bet on someone to make the college football playoff and then not have them to also win the conference. Like I don't know how many Big 12 teams are going to be at large teams in the field. So there could be some risk in that. It kind of feels like if you're doing one thing, you should be doing both.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's smart. If you wanted to go with a team that you don't think is going to win the conference, that you might think or that you think might still get into the playoff, I would say Utah. Utah
Yeah.
would be that team, depending on when I wrote this piece 2 months ago. Utah to make the college football playoff had plus 310 odds at FanDuel, and you know I think that's worth looking at.
Plus 280 now to come down.
Because I mean, this is a Utah program that we have seen get. You need like the right mix of things. Like you need, if you're not going to win. Now we haven't seen this, so this is all just conjectures. We don't know what's going to happen with a 12-team playoff or what the committee's going to value. But I would imagine that you would need to be in your conference title game, but lose your conference title game, and then have national respect. Like let's say West Virginia makes a run to the Big 12 title game and loses to an Oklahoma State or a Utah. I don't think West Virginia is in the playoff conversation for an at-large bid just because it made the Big 12 title game. But if Utah's there, we've seen Utah get quite a bit of national attention and respect and love in recent years. When you host Florida and you beat Florida, people are going to pay attention to you and value you. When you go to Gainesville and lose a pretty, entertaining game like what they lost, people are going to respect you. There's a level of respect with Utah's program from a national stage, and we've seen that with them consistently ranked high in preseason polls. And they were I don't remember when they fell out last year, but they were in it for probably longer than they should have been.
The Oregon game, that's when they fell out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so longer than they should have been. You need a little bit of that national respect where people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt a little bit. I think Kyle Whittingham helps in that regard. So like I could see Utah falling in a Big 12 championship game, and unless it got murdered like what it did to Oregon in those Pac-12 title games a couple years ago, still be in the conversation for an at-large berth. Again, I think Utah's good too. I just I can't seem to figure out why Vegas is or why I'm so much higher on Oklahoma State than other people are. Because I'm high on Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State's a team that plays to its competition a lot.
They are.
To a fault, perhaps. And that could be some of the pushback of like, all right, even if they are sitting there at 9-3, do they have one of those embarrassing losses that just kills them, where it's South Alabama again or something like that, where you're like, or Central Michigan, where you're just saying to yourself, well, like what? Like you're 9-3, but you lost to who? Like that doesn't make any sort of sense. So maybe that's kind of baked in with some of those odds. But I agree with you. When I saw that, I was kind of like going, that feels like disrespect for Mike Gundy when he's got obviously one of the most popular household names returning in the sport in Ollie Gordon.
It's also commentary on Alan Bowman as a quarterback. Yes, he's a 7th-year senior,
True.
but it's not like he's, I should have his interceptions in front of me because he threw
It's a
double-digit
lot.
interceptions last year.
It's a very interceptable ball, and I remember watching the bowl game against A&M and all those floaters that he would throw. I'm just like, he's basically playing 500 with the defense. And I'm like, dude, that some of these balls, man, you're getting away with some stuff because A&M, and you could do that against an A&M secondary that was really young and wasn't particularly good last year, but I was like, oh gosh, that'd be tough. So that's probably part of it as well.
He completed 61% of his passes, and he threw 14 interceptions against 15 touchdowns. He also threw 500 passes. This is the
Wow.
thing with Oklahoma State. I If you have Ollie Gordon in your backfield, you should not have a quarterback attempting 500 passes. You just
Ever.
shouldn't. And that's probably part of it too. Is Mike Gundy is still Mike Gundy, and he's going to do some stupid things sometimes because I think pride gets in the way a little bit, and it's like, well, my way is going to work. We're going to do this my way, and it's going to work. But yeah, I mean, I think they have a good team, and also too, like, with the expanded playoff, doesn't really matter if they have an embarrassing loss early in the season if they're 9-3 and Big 12 champs. They're getting in.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's a good point. If they're Big 12 champs, the ultimate.
If they're Big 12 champs, yeah.
The ultimate question. Okay, let me get you out of here with one thing, and it's something that I'm having a tough time kind of wrapping my head around these odds for getting into the college football playoff as a non-core four, as I call it, team. If you're at the group of 5 level, Liberty is at plus 550 and just has that absolute cake schedule. Caden Salter's coming back. Memphis is plus 600, but you've got games at Florida State, at South Florida, at UTSA, at Tulane. That seems really difficult. And then Boise State at plus 700 is interesting. But, like, I don't know. Like, even looking at it in the preseason with Boise State, because that's going to be a popular pick, the familiarity of it's probably not the best time to put a playoff bet on them. You probably want to wait till after the Oregon game if they get waxed by Oregon week 2, and then those odds are like plus 1,000 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like there, and how do you kind of approach betting on one of those teams? Like, if you're just like, hey, I want to have some action, do you just say, let me put 2 or 3 futures on on those teams to make the college football playoff this year?
Yeah, I'm not touching Liberty.
Interesting.
What was Liberty in the college football playoff? They were 23rd at 13-0 in last year's college football playoff
schedule.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen for them. You need to be, again, it goes back to that sort of like respect factor, that like national attention factor. And so that'll help a school like Memphis or a school like Boise State. Boise State's super intriguing because they got one of the best players in the country in Ashton Jeanty. Last I looked, the quarterback situation wasn't settled. They got Malachi Nelson coming over from USC, but I was reading some stuff from the spring, and it's not a guarantee that he's going to win the starting job. It's also not a guarantee that he's elite just because he's a former 5-star quarterback. He's another one of those guys that didn't have much opportunity to play at his previous school, and now he's, if he is the starter, there's going to be some growing pains there. I'm just a little hesitant on the group of 5 or the non-core 4. I like that core 4. Everybody keeps referring to the Power 5. Like, the Pac-12 is just Oregon State and Washington State. Like, that's not a power conference anymore.
Exactly.
Like, we need to. So I like the core 4. I like that. I mean, like, why are we under any delusions that the SEC and the Big Ten aren't going to dominate those at-large spots? Like, that's what's going to happen.
If you think of it as just one spot, right? If you think of it as just one guaranteed spot and someone has to get it, that's, I think, where I don't know how much Vegas has, like, we've never seen this before with this type of format, so we don't know the type of respect that's going to be given to that specific team. We've only seen it in the sense from a New Year's Six Bowl, and last year was kind of like, all right, well, Liberty's kind of the default, even though they didn't play anyone, and I guess they're undefeated, and then let's let them just get trucked by Oregon. Like, there's such a drop-off, it feels like, this year, and I've talked about this before. If you look at preseason top 25s, like, none of these teams are in there. And we're debating, is Air Force maybe going to be one of these teams or something? Like, it just feels like it's really difficult to try and project. And so maybe that, like, you just throw a few of these flyers out there and say, well, somebody's got to get it. And if I'm getting 7-1 on my money or 6-1 on my money, then at least maybe I can get some of that back.
Yeah, I like Boise and I like Memphis. I think Tulane is another one to be interested in.
John Summerall, pretty well coached.
Just the highest ranked conference champion. I think Tulane coming out of the American could be in that conversation. A couple years ago, they went to Norman and made a lot of people uncomfortable. So they play at Oklahoma on September 14th. You know, they also have Kansas State in the non-conference schedule. If you can catch OU still sort of in that feeling out stage and that like, all right, we're, you know, it's not a total offensive shift going from Jeff Levy to Seth Luttrell. There's some familiarity there, but also we just don't know how different that offense is going to look. So it's hard to really gauge like how long of a off ramp they need. But I think that game early in the season is interesting, that Tulane Oklahoma game, because you look at the rest of Tulane's schedule and Tulane could be in that spot. Ty Thompson out of the transfer portal, Mario Williams out of the transfer portal. They got some interesting pieces. And if I remember correctly, they also have one of the best pass rushers in the country.
Lose Chris Brazzell, though, to Tennessee. Lose Michael Pratt, guy that was there forever. That's the tough part. Last year, I thought at times they kind of struggled without Ty J. Spears. That was a game against Ole Miss that was down to the wire, like a lot closer than what the final score indicated and the play to Michael Trigg happens. But like if they had a Ty J. Spears like that to be able to kind of grind it out late against that Ole Miss defense, I thought they could have had them on their heels. Yeah, it is intriguing. Like Ole Miss, like I think got everything it can handle from Tulane. And a lot of people look at them, especially after what they did against USC the year before in the Cotton Bowl and say like, yeah, you just can't pencil that team in as an automatic win. That might be the play then for a group of 5 team. You're smiling because it happened to Lincoln Riley.
Oh man, that game. It's so frustrating watching his teams. It has been. I hope it's different with like a competent defensive coordinator in place now.
Do you hope it's different, Derek? Do you hope it's different? That's a no.
I agree with Lincoln when he says that college football is better when USC is good.
I hate. Oh God.
I mean, we need, especially now as we sort of get like a homogenization with these two leagues, the SEC and the Big Ten. We need from coast to coast really strong schools to still try to keep things level. And
we had that.
If USC, what's the team on the West Coast? Are you thinking Oregon?
Oregon. I think Oregon is.
I think you need a team. You just need a team in California. You need a team in California. It's not going to be UCLA anytime soon. Certainly not going to be Cal or Stanford. Stanford.
I had fun watching Stanford when USC was blowing chunks in the 2010s. I had fun watching Christian McCaffrey and Bryce Love. Does that mean college football was bad during that time?
These days are long gone, though. I think USC. I think USC being good. I get it. I get not liking Lincoln Riley. Like I get that. He's an easy guy to not like. But just for like my own personal like viewing experience, I would like to see USC be good, just to make it interesting, particularly in the Big Ten, because then it just adds one more threat to Ohio State.
I'm all for intrigue, but Lincoln Riley might have a little bit of a biased approach saying college football is better when USC is good. College football hasn't been good for the last 20 years.
He does have a biased approach. You're right. Yeah. But it's sort of like, it's like Nebraska too. Like the sport, like the product is better when your biggest brands are good.
I will disagree till the ends of the earth on that take. We will.
Okay.
I spent time there. I get it. I spent 2.5 years there, covered the home games. We talked about this before, but like, college football then just hasn't been good in the 21st century since Nebraska has been a shell of its former self. Like,
no, Connor, no, it hasn't. It has not. It has not been good. College football fell off after the 1997 season, and we've been trying desperately ever since to get it back. That's why they keep changing everything. We're changing things to bring Nebraska back to former glory. We handed Nebraska Scott Frost on a silver platter, and then that all went to hell. We're trying desperately to get this program back, because when this program comes back, the sport is better.
College football has never been the same since everybody else discovered that you can lift weights and it won't stunt your growth. That's really where it fell off.
Since it shifted from, if you just get a bunch of massive boys off farms and, the Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Dakota region of the country, that you can find talent elsewhere.
Yeah, no, just simple concept. Yeah, exactly. Derek, we're gonna have to do this again. We'll do this again really soon. Plan is for you to be at media days with us, so hopefully we'll be able to chop it up again. Good luck with everything moving related, and I'm sure we'll be talking very soon here.
Next time we talk, I'll have a setup on my back wall right here that rivals yours. You got Wrigley up there though, so it'll be a little difficult.
Of course, yeah, we got Wrigley, we got the Billy Williams lithograph there from the Hall of Fame. We're stocked, man. I got to get something right here though. That's what's lacking. This spot for the non YouTube audience. I'm pointing to the blank spot on my wall. That feels like it should just have something, but
you just need a little sideboard there with a plant or something, and you're good to go.
Yeah, a little succulent. I'm a big succulent guy. You can do something like that. That'd work. Yeah, exactly, man. All right, man. We'll talk soon.